Everybody, thanks so much for listening to us. If you're listening to us on one of the podcasting sites, please like, subscribe, share this interview. This is an important woman that is running for an important office. We need to get some of these corrupt Democrats out, and she's going to be running, well, she is running, I should say, against one of the most corrupt Democrats in Congress who's taken huge amounts of money from Big Pharma. This is Kurt Schrader, who is that guy, but we are trying to replace him with a woman that actually cares about the working class people, that comes from working class backgrounds and union backgrounds. This is Jamie Mcleod Skinner. And Jamie, first of all, thanks so much for coming on. It's truly an honor to have you on the program today.
Well, it's a real privilege to be here. So thanks so much for the invitation. And thanks for caring about our democracy and really being focused on having good representation for all of us, not just for Oregonians, but for all of us in Congress.
Well, again, if you get into Congress, which we hope you do, when you get in to be the Congresswoman there, you're going to be voting not just for the Oregonians in your district, but for Floridians, for Rhode Islanders, for Californians. So all these people, because we need these votes, especially with the House with a very small Democratic tilt right now. I believe it's 5 votes. And who knows what's going to happen in 2022, but we'll get into that. But Jamie, can you tell people that don't know you a little bit about you and the district in general?
Sure, happy to. So a little bit about just my background on a personal level. I mean, we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before, and one of my greatest heroes is my mom. She's been a real role model, and she's a retired teacher. When I was a kid, she would get up early to drive a school bus, teach all day, drive a school bus home, and in the summers would work in the orchards picking fruit to put food on our tables. So that really helped to shape me and inform my thinking, not only of that hard work, but that real commitment to family and community. I went on and got degrees in engineering and planning. Later on I got a law degree with a focus on water law, natural resources, Indian law. But most of my career spent in community service. I began early on my service work in Bosnia and Kosovo just after the war. I was in charge of reconstructing schools and hospitals in the war-torn country. Back in the day, if you were out, and I'd come out as a young adult, you couldn't serve in the military. So I worked for a humanitarian organization, did that work. When I wanted to come back to the States, the International Rescue Committee asked me to run their refugee resettlement office in the Bay Area. So I worked down in California for a while and then returned home to Oregon. And just really, most recently, been working on affordable housing, also on wildfire recovery. That's been a huge issue here in Oregon. And so those are some of the things and some of the expertise that I'm bringing to this role. In terms of the needs of my district, very similar to really across the country. I mean, the really huge issues we're all facing, the crises we're all facing is first and foremost our working families and individuals recovering from the COVID economy. People are hurting, and it seems like so many people in Congress don't get it and don't understand that sense of urgency that our families are at the breaking point. So whether it's providing just resources and childcare and healthcare and healthcare that works for all of us, housing and affordable housing, there's a huge list of things that were part of the Build Back Better and the infrastructure package, the full infrastructure package that the president was trying to move forward. And folks like Kurt Schrader have gotten in the way of that. The other big thing is the climate crisis that we're facing. So here in Oregon on the West Coast, we've been facing wildfires and drought and flooding as well in some areas. And it's just, we're at a crisis level, and we must deal with both the long-term impacts and change the trajectory that we're on, as well as help to respond to families who are in need and responding to the crises, the environmental crises we're facing. And then, of course, the fundament of our democracy. I'm running against someone who waved off the insurrection, and I think the only Democrat who did not support impeaching Trump after the January 6th insurrection. He said it would be the equivalent of a lynching. So making sure we not just protect our democracy, but really make it work for everyone, because the promise of our democracy have not worked for all our families. And so I think it's both protecting and shoring up the democracy that we have and making it more accountable to everyone here, obviously in Oregon, but really across the country.
So when you're out in the district talking to the men and women of the district, what are they telling you as their most important topics of conversation, their most important issues?
Sure. So first and foremost, this district is essentially a new district. So in as of last year, prior to last year, Oregon had 5 congressional districts. We now have 6. And so we have a new district, and this district was dramatically redrawn. And so I'm not actually running against a true incumbent. There's less than half of an overlap with the old district. And so this newly drawn 5th congressional district extends from, for those who know Oregon, from southern Portland down south and over the Cascades into central Oregon, where my wife and I live. Mm-hmm. And this is an area that includes the urban-rural divide. And I've done a lot of work. I serve on an education service district board in Central Oregon. I serve statewide on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And so we're hearing a lot on environmental issues, on education issues, but wildfire recovery is huge. And so that sense of relevance, understanding how we can get out of that crisis and risk situation that families are in. Again, frontline families, whether it's folks who are helping to put food on our table, whether it's folks who are providing healthcare, they're exhausted. Our educators are exhausted. And that's the biggest thing right now. So things like providing childcare support is a critical part of just keeping our communities functional. I know a lot of folks have been dismissing this as somehow some kind of extra support, but really to get our families through this time of crisis, people are exhausted. And
those
we need
people,
that
I'm sorry
support.
to interrupt, Jamie. Those people don't know how much childcare costs then if they're saying that.
That's right. And I think that's true. It's true for Kurt Schrader. It's also true for other people in Congress as well, who've never had to sit down around a kitchen table and make those tough choices. The housing costs are outrageous. So getting affordable housing is critical, because we've got families, and I've had these conversations with folks who are making decisions to either keep their housing or provide critical health care to their family members. We have Oregonians who are going into bankruptcy, losing, and this is urban again and rural, folks who are losing multi-generational family farms because of needing health care for their families. So those are crises. A big one here in Central Oregon, again, climate related, is drought. And so working with farmers who are struggling to get enough water to keep their crops going. So these issues cut across the political spectrum, cut across the urban-rural divide. And so being able to connect with folks across that divide is critically important to get us focused on what the actual problems are and the solutions we need to pursue. There's such a shouting match going on, and people are standing on either side of the fence screaming at each other. That's such a waste of time, and it's frustrating everyone. We need to really focus on what are those solutions we need to pursue, and how do we get it done for Oregonians and for the American people.
When you get into Congress, what can you do to make these people get something done? Our climate is in crisis right now. And I'm worried about, and I hear this from a lot of my friends too, they're saying we don't want to have any kids because, who wants to bring it? That's like, they think it's like an evil thing to bring a kid into a world that's going to be on fire, hurricanes, tornadoes, everything in the kitchen sink. So as a person that's a planner, as a person that's an engineer, you know all about this stuff and how it works. What can we do when you get into Congress to make sure that we can have a planet for our kids and grandkids if we do have them?
Well, there's 2 big parts of this. The first part is to get us off this path we're on. I mean, we're driving 100 miles an hour towards a cliff, and we know it, and we're not doing anything about it. And so what are those investments? Your and my taxpayer dollars are being invested right now in fossil fuel companies. I'm running against someone. You mentioned the big pharma money he takes. Schrader also takes tons of money from the fossil fuel companies. I mean, he was also cutting deals with them prior to the infrastructure bill. That whole thing, that whole discussion about stocks and swapping stocks, he was part of that whole discussion prior to having the infrastructure bill go forward. So we have to get away from the investment in fossil fuel, and we have to invest in renewable energy. We're already we're spending in the wrong direction. This is also, quite frankly, a national security issue. So if we're talking about where some of these resources need to be, and our military has already shifted to understanding that we need more renewable sources for fuel sources. So we need to shift resources into those investments. Here's a really important part of that also, is that this is not jobs versus labor has often been pit against the environmental movement. This is a partnership, because we're talking about creating good paying jobs, bringing along the partnership, not leaving people behind, but making that investment out front and making that transition to renewable. So we can do that. There's strategies in place. That's really important. The second big piece of this conversation is helping people respond to the crises they're facing. So last year, from January to June, I served as interim city manager at a small city down in Southern Oregon that had lost a third of its homes and businesses to wildfire. It was this devastating wildfire that ripped through. Most families had moments to flee their home, lost everything. What was really cruel about this wildfire is the majority of homes that were burned were seniors on a fixed income and farm workers. So folks who have very limited resources. And so I stepped in to help get the city back on its feet, also help to begin the rebuilding process, making sure we were connecting with communities in a language that was appropriate for them, helping to have local government be accountable to them, and also making sure that our state and federal government was accountable also to the needs of our community. So that second piece of, now that we are in the midst of this climate crisis, making sure that we're responsive to the needs of folks who experience it and help them to transition out is also critically important. There was all sorts of challenges that I experienced and I saw families experience with the processes we have in place now. So to that point, making sure that those processes are more effective and more responsive is critically important. And to your point, we've seen this all over the country. So yes, we have to, the first piece, we have to get ourselves on a better trajectory, head towards a neutral instead of polluting the environment, that we're working in what we can do in the States, and also leveraging and influencing our partners across the globe to get us on a trajectory that is sustainable. And then the second piece of that is to make sure those who are dealing with crisis get the support they need.
What is your position on Medicare for all? Do you support it? Do you support more of a public option? What is your position on all this?
I absolutely support it, because we need solutions. We're embarrassingly behind other comparable nations across the globe. And it's got to, that the program laid out is a smart way to financially, sustainably provide healthcare, and the full range of healthcare. It's also, dental and visual and all these things. I mean, the basic things that are putting small businesses and putting family farms and putting all these putting our economy at risk. Those are the solutions we need to create. We take care of some of those things, and then it also sets the stage for greater success for our economy and our families across the board. But it's also, I'm talking to nurses and doctors, they're also saying that we're facing a crisis of not having enough staff. So we also need to invest in the essentially the pipeline of personnel. And this goes to, debt-free college and all those other things that are investments in our community. I was first elected in 2004, and I've always said, I don't believe in spending public money. I believe in investing it. But when you're talking about providing healthcare for families, that's a smart investment in your community, your community's health, and looking at a full range of holistic health. And that's physical and mental health, because those are the impacts that then impact other aspects and create other costs. It's just a smart way to do it. And so, but to your point about buzzwords, I think we really need to get out of the buzzwords and talk about the ideas. When I ran 2018, I found in some of the more rural parts of Oregon, people who loved the Affordable Care Act, but hated Obamacare. Well, of course, those two are the same things. And it's not to poke fun at folks. It's just that, to your point earlier, Republicans have been really good at demonizing ideas like Obamacare, which was the ACA, although even the ACA didn't go far enough. That was essentially reforming health insurance and not really health care. So we need to take it the full step. But also, other ways that we can get things out of the buzzwords. The Green New Deal. There's some great ideas and great solutions about protecting our planet and also working in partnership with labor to create joint solutions. But at this point, Republicans have demonized that phrase. And so what I've found most successful is when you show up and have those conversations, outside of your bubble and across that political spectrum, and talking about ideas and talking about solutions. Talk about the components of these projects, not just the term itself. Because if people have been poison pilled on these terms, they're going to knee jerk against it. But when you talk about the components of it, that's when you get people really to lean in and their heads are nodding. They'll say, yeah, that's what we have to do. That's, I think, what we need to focus on.
I want to talk about Kurt Schrader.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is totally, like you said, he's bought out to the fossil fuel companies. He's bought out to Big Pharma. You just spoke about Medicare for all, and himself, along with, a couple other Democrats in the House, were trying to put the kibosh on Build Back Better. I believe they did, along with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in the Senate. So what do you feel like happened with Build Back Better with somebody like Kurt Schrader? Why weren't people berating him and bringing these topics out? And I blame this on the news media too, because they were not going after people like Kurt Schrader, saying that they take all this money, big money, from fossil fuels and also from healthcare companies. What is going on in our country when we can't get a bill like Build Back Better? It's 1.7 trillion over 10 years, not over 1 year. This is bad messaging, like I said, not only by the White House, but, senators and congressmen alike, and the people in the media. So what do you feel like happened with Build Back Better?
Well, just one other point in terms of the cost. It was also for Build Back Better to our defense spending was a 1-to-4 ratio.
Right.
Well, I would say we're talking about, and we do need a strong defense, but our national security is what's at risk if we don't move forward on some components of Build Back Better. And then when you talked about, he's a big pharma era, so he comes from that. He's never had to make those kitchen table decisions, those tough decisions. He does get big pharma money. He also gets fossil fuel money. He also gets Koch brother money. They max out on him. So if you have any questions about his priorities, because those companies and those corporate PACs they pay for votes, essentially. You can deny it all you want, but that's the fact of the matter. So that's been his focus. The other thing, just an example of the votes that they've bought, that Big Pharma's bought, he was a deciding vote, a no vote against lowering our prescription drug prices. So it was the opportunity to have Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices. He voted no and killed it in committee. That would have been huge. And so those resources that go from our pockets to Big Pharma now go into his pocket through those through the corporate PAC contributions he takes. He's just out of touch. I mean, there's that about Big Pharma. He's stripped even out of the infrastructure bill. He stripped out renewable energy programs, funding for renewable energy programs. He's really dragged things out in Build Back Better and slowed it down and made so much work for those, even though he came through after it was stripped down and voted yes. He gutted a lot of really critical programs out, and he also slowed it down, which made it tougher to move it forward. And now we're still seeing it in a holding pattern. So yeah, absolutely, he's right there with Manchin and Sinema in terms of his priorities. I mentioned before, even his approach to our democracy and lack of wanting to protect our democracy after the insurrection. When Democrats were talking about a potential impeachment of the president, he said, no, shouldn't do that. That would be like lynching the president, which is just outrageous and a slap in the face to our BIPOC communities. So that being out of touch, I can tell you Oregonians are talking about it. And in this new district, that's less than half of an overlap with his old district, he's not a true incumbent. A lot of Democrats are also really nervous about the fact that he underperforms in his races, he has in his past races. Voters are really angry at him. And so if he was unchallenged, he would likely lose. A Democrat would likely lose this seat, and we'd see a Trump Republican step in. One of the reasons why people encourage me so strongly to step forward is because I overperform my races. We're looking at a swing district now, a D+2. He underperformed by 2% in his last race. I overperformed by 10% in the last midterm. And so forget about just the whole values thing. Even having someone with the D after their name to get them into the seat is going to be really critical to replace Schrader in the primary. But he's been a headache for Democrats for a long time. He's tried to dismiss me by saying I'm running to the left of him. Well, of course I'm running to the left of him. The fact of the matter is he is so far to the right that running to the left of him simply means you're a Democrat. But I'm also very proud of being a pragmatic progressive. So yeah, he's just, I've had all sorts of folks, endorsers who used to endorse him, who've crossed over because they said he's lost touch. He's lost touch. He doesn't understand the urgency of now. He doesn't understand the challenges that people are facing, from working families to our climate to protecting our democracy. And it's time for someone to be addressing these challenges that we're facing, and also just replacing someone who's creating more headaches than creating solutions.
My thing is that I'm worried about with you is he's getting all this money. All this big money's coming in, and if they see you're making a move, they're going to hammer you like a hammerhead shark. And I know that's kind of a funny statement, but what's true is true. How are you going to stand up against this big money? I know you said you're going to go around and talk about the issues, and I'm grateful you're doing that because we need more people that are opposing these people. They just sit in office for year upon year upon year, and they stay in their office, men and women, until they're 80 years old, and they do nada. They just collect a lot of money, and or if they do leave office or they do lose their race, they go and be lobbyists and collect more money. And it's like a revolving door in this system. So how are you going to go against this big money interests that he has on his side? Because he's got quite a few on his side.
That's right. Well, I'm going to do it the same way Bernie did it, by having people step up and contribute. So anyone listening, it's JamieForOregon.com, JAMIEFOR Oregon.com. And please, people, ask folks to make contributions. We actually hit our fundraising goal this first quarter. We have our game plan and our strategy is twofold. Yes, it's fundraising to get messaging out, but it's also our ground game. And that involves a whole slew of volunteers. So we're building on the plan or the model we set up in 2018, where we were able to raise 1.3 mil and then also 2,600 volunteers. And that's in an area where people had not given to a Democrat before, and where you hadn't seen that kind of ground game. So folks who can, even if you're outside the state, you can obviously always contribute money. So ask people to help out that way. And then also there's other ways to volunteer, making calls, texting. We can tap you into our field team and really help to engage folks. So this is going to be a critical, it's going to be it is a swing district now. So it's a slight leaning Dem district. So it's going to be critical to keep this a Dem district, but a real Dem. And that's the opportunity we have. So if folks will step up, that's how we're going to do it.
You do get into Congress, Jamie. What bill will you first co-sponsor or sponsor in general?
There's a long list. There's a lot of things that we need to. You mentioned healthcare. That's a critical one. Part of it is both on priority, but also what's queued up and what can we get across the finish line. And so it's going to depend in part on where some of these things are. If we're still grappling over some of these Build Back Better legislation, we got to get that across the finish line. But there's a lot of different priorities that are just tied into my personal values that I will work on. But it's hard to say because there is a laundry list.
Last audience question. We kind of just tapped on this a couple of questions ago, that these men and women stay in Congress for 80 till they're 80. I guess I should say they don't stay in there for 80 years, but some of them stay somewhat close. But regardless of that, would you support term limits if it did come up?
Yeah, I think it's a good practice. When I served on a city council, years ago, we had term limits, and so it was 2 terms. So I served for 8 years, And I think it makes a lot of sense. Even if you're really good at what you do and you really enjoy it and voters like you, it doesn't hurt for you to take a little breather and then come back to it. If you're really that good and popular with voters, they'll elect you again. So there's nothing wrong with sitting it out, neither having the duration of time you can serve or total time you can serve. Both of those are, I think, make a lot of sense, because there's you gotta keep in mind it's not about you. It's about the vision of what you're trying to do. And then also it's helping to prepare the next generation to take over the reins of government and the reins of leadership. There's times that I've been successful in races, times that I haven't been. And when I haven't been, I've pivoted to really working with developing emerging leaders, because that's important. I mean, we've all got a fixed amount of time on this earth. And, again, it's not ultimately about us individually. It's about the work that we do and the vision that we're a part of. And so, yeah, I think term limits helps to remind candidates and elected officials about that, but it also creates those opportunities for new leadership to step up.
Jamie Mcleod Skinner, and she is running for Congress again in Oregon's 5th district. Definitely get out if you're in that district, or even in the state of Oregon, or maybe even close by, if you could volunteer to help her out. And if you do live close by, if you can throw a couple of bucks her way, that would be great. If not, even if you don't live close by, definitely if you could throw a couple of bucks. Jamie, before we go, people can find you, obviously, jamiefororegon.com. What else can they do besides, volunteer, throw a couple of bucks? Anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of stuff you can do remotely. So even if you're outside the district or outside the state, please contact us. I'll put you in touch. I'll connect you to my team, my field team. And there's tons of ways we can engage you. And then also, we're on social media. So Jamie for Oregon on multiple platforms, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and others. So helping to really amplify the message and get the word out. It's critically important. As you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, this is about whoever is serving in Congress is impacting all of our lives. And so we all have a vested stake in this, and getting enough folks in who are progressive minded to get a lot of this important legislation, we talked about some of it today, to get it across the finish line, to get it into law, and then to also help to message it across the political divide and across the urban-rural divide, so that we can help to just get it done. I mean, that's the challenge we've had right now. So we appreciate that, really enjoy this conversation, appreciate folks reaching out, jamiefororegon.com. We will find something for you to do if you're interested, and really thanks, and let's go make our country a better place.
Jamie, you could be a huge bright spot for not only Oregon in 2022, but America in general. We hope so anyway. Jamie Mcleod Skinner, again, jamiefororegon.com. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Rob.